Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, we're in the middle of Discourse 24, V'hu Omed Aleim, Parsha Vayera, Chapter Tzadik Beis, bottom of page Kuf Ayin Vav 176. And we're now the second interpretation of Sefirah, Meloshin from the word Sipur, narrative, Sipur v'Haggadah. After the 9 chapters on Mispar, number. But, as we see from the idea, he begins here where he left off. We're back to Eris and Kalim. We're back to energies and containers. But now it's in the context of a story. So he quotes the Pardes, Shem Rabbeinu Shem Tev. What does the Pardes say? That Sefirah is from the word Sipur, Hashamayim Mesaprim, and the key words are, just to make sure we have the right words, K'mosh HaDibur v'Hamichtav, Yevayir b'Hagbalos Elias Murgish HaDvorim HaNelamim, Mitech Machshavas HaChacham, Kein HaShamayim Meidem Al Hashem Yizbarach. Shekein HaSfiris He Megalas HaMachshavas HaNelamim. So just like words, speech, and writing, Yevayir, explain, or in their definitions, they explain in a way that we can sense the concealed things within the concealed thoughts within the thought of the Chacham, the wise person. So too the heavens, what do we say, indicate on God, and the Sefirahs reveal the hidden machshavas. And the Pardes adds, "Shasfiris mesapis umagbilis es habilti mugbo." The Sefirahs, they relate, umagbilis, and they confine or limit that which is unlimited. So the story is, in other words, an unlimited one. The story is telling us a story of the infinite, but it does it by giving us a finite expression, basically. So this is what he's going to explain. So it's actually a very, very poetic. So the Sefirahs tell us a story. What story they tell us? A story that's beyond limitations and that's concealed. So he explains that this is like machshava, that Dibur reveals what's inside the mind, machshava, and this is a Yitzira compared to Bria, because Bria is Cheshach, it's still in a more of a nebulous state, and then it's revealed. And to explain all this, he begins with, again, back to the Kalim and the Eris. So as the Sefirah that seals there, primarily they are containers, and they reveal energy, the energy within them. Why do they have to reveal it? Why can't the energy be revealed on its own? Because by definition, as he explains, the nature of Eir is a nature of Aliyah and Istalkus. Like we see in the faculties of the person, that the more refined, the more exalted, the more elevated a faculty is, the more it ascends. And the contrary, more faculty that's more deals with the outer extremities, it descends. It began with Midas compared to Seichel, so that's why Midas are compared to the Gvarim Chitzenim, the outer organs and limbs, Roy Yamina, because Midas have, as he said, a few different things, that Midas are all about expression outward, and they extend to something beneath them, and they are not the revelation of the essence of the person, it's a relation of a more degraded state, a lower state. As opposed to intellect is the other way around. Are not that revealed. It's more concealed within yourselves, within oneself. Person who's intelligent does not speak as much, and the effect is not to another, but within, especially Meichin the Godless, where you see a person is completely separate. Same thing as Eir. And he brings the example, Meichin and Midas, he says, is also fits very well here to Eiris and Kalim, because in Eitz Chaim it says that it's Eir and Kali, the Meichin and Midas. Okay, and this goes back to finally the example from fire, Eish Eichlo, why God is called the fire that consumes. Because that's fire, like he brings from Tanya, chapter 19. The nature of fire is it elevates to its source. And it's only the wick and the fuel that ground it and contain it. Because they themselves are sublimate themselves, so the air, so to speak, responds to them. But the Eira on its own would not remain contained. So we see from all this, that's where we are. That Eira on its own expires and ascends, and the Kalim reveal it. That's where it's up to. So we're going to continue the discussion, obviously, to explain now what Mitzipur is. The Rayel is at the bottom of page 176, chapter 92. And Rayel is a proof to this. A proof to what? A proof that Eir on its own ascends, and it's the Keli, the container that grounds it. So he says, a Rayel is a proof to the Shari, Be'ilam Hatayu, Shayamir Kelim, that in the world of Tayu, so let's explain what Tayu is. Tayu is what's sometimes called the world of Nikudim. So you have Ak, Akudim, Nikudim, Vrudim. It's usually the way it's described. Sometimes Ak is close to Akudim, but generally it's like that. As we've learned, Ak is usually Bria de Klolos, Akudim, Nikudim is Yitzira de Klolos, and Asiya de Klolos of the macrocosm is Atzilus de Protis, or Abiyah. Kesed is not a world. Kesed is a Kesed of Atzilus, Kesed of, you can have Kesed of Tayu, Kesed of Ak.
When you start with Ak, there's no like Kesed in the
No, you'd say Kesed itself is a Kesed Kloli, and then there's a Kesed Prati in Ak. Kesed is like the Sefirah. That's what each world is comprised of. It's like there's worlds and there's Sefirah. The worlds are the dimensions, and the Sefirahs are the building blocks in each world. So they repeat themselves. That's where there's a Kesed of Ak, there's a Kesed of Nukudim, there's a Kesed of Atzilus, Kesed of Bria, Kesed of Yitzira. So there's always a Kesed, but that's already, once you say Atzilus, there's a Kesed there. There's always a Kesed before a world begins.
But not a Kesed on itself, as in like
No. But listen, a Kesed is also a part of it. Sometimes, like for example, sometimes is Atik and Arich is what's called Yitzira de Klolos. Instead, there's two ways. Yitzira de Klolos sometimes is Akudim Nukudim, or Akudim, and sometimes it's Atik and Arich. It depends. You just have to think of it always like a macrocosm, and levels. But when you speak Elamis, you usually go Akudim, Nukudim, Vrudim, and you don't really focus on it. It all depends on the context. There's no, but that's the picture. It's like asking where Chochmah is. There's always a Chochmah somewhere, Bina, but that's usually in a world. And remember, at the end of the day, Chochmah, for example, in Atzilus is Atzilus Shabbatzilus. Bina in Atzilus is Bria Shabbatzilus. So you have it again within each other. So you can have all the four worlds in Kesed. But that, the Maimon will spell that out, that it's that way. Usually, when you say Atzilus, we're talking about Atzilus, the Protis, for example. That's a given. But so Elam HaTeyu is a place where the energies are very intense still. They're still from the Kav. The containers are very immature, basically. They're just growing. They're just developing. So they're very wild, untamed. So in Akudim, you say Akudim b'klei echad. 10 energies in one container, as we've learned. So there can't be a shvira there. There can't be a shattering of the containers. In Tayut, it says Eris merubim, very intense energy, Kelim muatim, and very weak containers. Fragile. Good. And then in Tikkun, that's why it's called Tikkun, or Vrudim, Tikkun repairs the energies and containers. So he's speaking now, he's bringing a Rai from Tayu, he wants to explain this issue of the energy and the container. Because in Atzilus it works, energy and container. In Atzilus, the flame and the wick are commensurate to each other. They work very beautifully. Later we'll learn about the different psilas that don't work. Like, remember Elo Hamadlikin. Because then the Keli. So he's just using Tayu as an example. He wants to explain this idea of Eir and Keli. So he says like this: a raya, a proof to what we discussed, because in Elam HaTeyu, where there's the miut HaKelim, either fragile, but miut here means diminished. Meaning that the kelim are not roy, they're not fitting, appropriate to contain, to hold on to, v'yisyashiv b'ha'me'er, that the energy should and the light should settle in them peacefully. Yashiv means that, like when you see, let's say, a wet wick, you see the flame is sparking, the flame is jumping. It's not that. Yishvashvus is when you say something settles in. It's contained and settled in. Like a yeshiva. You go to yeshiva.
Right, conducive.
Yeah. Mezist, kfeshta bank.
Shleiruya means not conducive.
Conducive or fitting, appropriate. Yeah, correct words. Hari hoya shvira mitzad zeh. So we see, what do we see? So we see the proof. In El Matei, where there's the diminution, and they're not, and the energy is not contained and settled. That caused the shvira. That caused the breaking, the shattering of the containers. Why? Because the energy, being that the container was not appropriate, was not fitting, not conducive. So what happened? The energy expired above. And what happened? The containers shattered and fell below. Figuratively speaking. It means they were left orphaned, essentially. So you see from that, why did that happen? If aired by nature and Keli just work well with each other, then the energy should not go anywhere. Why didn't it go anywhere? Why does it expire? Because on its own, he's proving, its nature is not to tell a story, basically. Its nature is to withdraw and go into itself, like Moichen's nature. It's introverted by nature, but not introvert as in, it's like going, ascending.
Even Megashmis, if you light a fire that's a little bit too strong in a glass.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you see it other. If the wick is not appropriate, the flame will leave.
But the glass, but it won't shatter.
Yeah, but the shattering is not the ikar here. The ikar is that air is nostalgic, because that's the main thing. Vagam da air de teyu, and even though the light or energy of teyu hoye bechinas ribui, even though it was a form of intense, there was a lot of air. That's why it was that it's so intense. That's why it did not have the ability to be contained in the container. In other words, there are two reasons why the air is too much and the keli is too weak. So two things are going on here. In other words, that too. Right, because if the keli was strong enough, it would have been able to contain it. I assume is what he say. He was going to that keli. The li is dam shachos eir al dekli. She'ena eir yeru nimshach tzadas mikimal dekli dafke. Mela nimshach eir kafi efen akli. V'akelim detayol liyesem b'chinas kelim al kaponim himshichu gam kenes eir akli yesem kelim tanim she'ena meruim lekabel eir she'yeh b'chinas yisashvus himshichu eir be'efen kazeh she'yev sh'liyashav. It's a longer piece. He's proving, because you could make the argument. He says, who says it's because the containers? Who said maybe the energies were just not worthy, or the energies are not conducive to enter into containers? So he says, no, that also comes from the container. So let's go back in English. I'll translate. That's also from the container. Why? Because the container is in general the process. But you see, he's bringing a proof from Teyu. That what? He's bringing a proof from Teyu that Eir on its own expires and Keli reveals it. And the proof is, because since the containers were weak, Miyata Kelim, therefore there was a Shvira. So now he's asking, maybe it's not a proof. Maybe it has nothing to do with that. Maybe because the energy was too intense. So that's why the container didn't contain it. Not because the energy is a Teva of Aliyah. So you say, no, that's not the case. Because the fact is that the only way energy really is revealed is through containers. What's bothering me is, that's what he said in the previous chapter. So what's the raya from Teyu? You understand? From Teyu, the proof that you need that containers is because containers is what reveals energy. But how could you use that? That was what he said till now. And he's using that as a answer to the question. That's what's bothering me when I'm reading this. You understand what I'm asking? He made a case and he proved it, that energy on its own, light on its own expires and container reveals. Right? Now he says, Arayel is one second.
The last line. It's a continuation from the last line.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I got it. Absolutely. Raya. So Raya, a strong Raya. We see what happens when containers are. What would be the best way to prove it? make containers weak, and the energy expires. So you know that's the case, that without container. But then he says, but maybe that's not the containers that are doing it. Maybe it's the energy's intensity that caused it to expire. Not because the keli is not there to reveal. So he says, no. Okay, you have to say it's both reasons, bottom line. So he says, no. You can't say that because that also comes from the container. Why? Because air only extends through keli. So then the proof is not from Toyu, the proof is from the theory. That's what I'm asking.
From keli.
From what he said till now, but he's trying to bring a proof from Toyu because the energies expire. And then he asks, and even though the energies expire, maybe it's on their own, maybe it has nothing to do with the keli. So what's his answer?
It doesn't have to do with the keli.
So what's the raya from Toyu? It's not a raya from Toyu. I understand it's a proof of Toyu once you know. Okay, look, I just said a stronger raya would be that it's absolutely from Toyu. Here, logic, generally speaking, if you bring proof from something and then you ask a question on that proof, and you go back to your original argument, that's why you know. So then the proof is not the proof is from your argument before. That's what I'm trying to say. But I guess at the end of the day,
I don't think he wants to bring absolute proof from this.
I'm just dying the word raya. I understand. Look, I'm not asking what we call a kasha on the whole understanding. The understanding is clear. I'm just pointing out this point. That's all. So let's read on. Maybe there's more to say here. So he says that even though the air itself is in a state of intensity and cannot on its own be contained by the keli, right? But nevertheless, this is also from the point because of the container. Why? Because the transmission of energy is through a container. Energy, a light, does not descend and extend on its own, as we learned. Only through a container. And therefore, an energy flows commensurate, tailored, the way according to the container, as we've learned before about, let's say, the faculties. If the container is weak, like for example, a person who wears glasses, it's not because our vision got weaker, it's because the container cannot contain the vision. Like the retina, whatever, far-sighted, close, near-sighted. So, v'hakelim d'tayu li'esim b'chinas kelim al kaponim, and the containers of tayu, being that they're at least containers, not getting to whether they're weak or fragile or strong, they too drew down the energy. But being small containers, diminished containers, this is the conclusion, that they're not worthy, they're not conducive, they're not appropriate to contain the energy in a way that it should be settled. I think this line
is very critical.
Right. So they draw down the energy in a way that is not really settled. In other words, what he's saying here is that it's not just the energy being intense, it's that the container's small state, diminished state, is what they draw down. But they draw down in a way that it's not settled. So there's a proof in that sense, because if the containers were the way they should be, they were not mu'atim. If they were strong containers or mature containers,
or if there would be no containers.
Okay, right. No, if there were no containers, the energy would expire. Right. Yeah. Since there's something there, and the energy still the energy still expires, it means that that is the containers that do the revealing. And if the containers are damaged, in other words,
not efficient.
Yeah. Right. Both scenarios are possible. Elias hakavonahu Elias. One second. So, it's essentially making the case that if there's a, let me. I don't know what he's going to say later, but let me just put it this way: if someone tells a story, since we're talking about story, and for some reason the message isn't getting across, right? So yes, you could say the person is so involved in the story, they're so intense that it's just like they're too excitable and they don't even know how to share it properly. But at the end of the day, it's the kelim that if the person doesn't have the right words and containers, so the story is not going to come across, even though there's a powerful story there. That's the idea here. So you can't just say it's his excitability because you see another person who prepares himself or writes it down or organizes himself, and he'll tell a story with all the drama too. I'm just use the example that's in this context here. Obviously, all this is critical to make the case of what this Rabbi Shem Tov and Pardes say about what means masapis and magbilis, a built-in mugbal, that they're revealing the concealed that's unlimited. Yeah. The liyas hakavonahu. 1 second. So there are things, for example, there are flow, because you just said, evoked this. There are energies, let's say sunlight. Sunlight shines to earth even though there are no kalim. Eira nefesh does not shine into the body if there are no kalim. Okay, so that's like makif. 1 second, that's like a makif, hold on. But in this nefesh for sure, if the faculties are not proper, the limbs and organs are not healthy, God forbid, or they're not, they won't draw right.
Life force.
Exactly, because the life force enters. Okay,
like
so
vacuum,
yeah, or the opposite.
Yeah.
Or the opposite. But that's because of a vacuum. That the vacuum is what pulls the.
That's the keli. It pulls it in.
Okay, there I would say the opposite because it's lacking energy. That's why it reveals. But I wouldn't use that. But it doesn't matter. But then there's the other extreme where the energy flows too much. There's an overflow of energy, but the container won't. If the container is weak, the energy will have to leave because there's nowhere for it to go. It says in Chassidus brings why we say saginar on a blind person. Saginar means a ribuy eir, a lot of light. So Chassidus says, what is it? Is it like what's the lashon there? Leik l'rosh, like laughing at him. And you say, tell someone's blind, you're telling a person is full of light. So it says taka because the eyes are lacking the shadow, the cheshacher sheba'ayin. So it's like translucent, opaque or translucent that just lets light flow through. Translucent filters, and that so the light, a seeing eye person, light goes in, but it goes in with a filter. Without a filter, it blinds you, like looking at the sun without sunglasses. So there's that element. So that's what a keli does. The keli does it makes sure that the flow is perfect. So if it's too much, it will expire, or if it's too little, or the kelim are too little, it'll expire. Or the energy is too much, and the kelim are too little. Okay. The bottom line is that the containers are critical components in this whole thing.
If we won't have a place to go, we'll leave.
Right. Oliyas hakavona, hiliyas hamshachas ha'er, and being that the objective is that there should be a transmission of lighter energy, kamashikosav leilusayu vara el l'sheves yitzara. Did not create the world for it to be chaotic, disorganized. El l'sheves yitzara, that we should settle it. L'sheves yitzara, which means literally l'sheves is to civilize the land, populate it. Yitzhara is referring to the creation, like Bara is like Bria, and Sheves Yitzhara is like Yitzira. Lazeis nischadesh betikun liyasri be'akela. So to this end was created or innovated or conceived nischadesh, something new, betikun, in the world of tikkun. What? There should be liyasri be'akela. There should be abundance of containers. What does that mean? Not just a bunch of containers. It means that they should be they should be conducive. They should be fashioned and shaped in a way that they're worthy. They're conducive to be held and be settled. That the energy should be contained and settled within them. The opposite of Tayo. Yeah.
Isn't that the way we know that the Eir exists altogether? The is here or is came through the Keli. They're the ones that advertise it or make it real. Because it came, it went, and we don't know about it. How do we know?
Correct. That's correct. That's true.
So basically, the focus is on the Kalim more than the air. In other words,
In the revelation part, yeah, but in knowing, being aware of it, yeah, that's true. That's 100% correct. If there were no Kalim, we would have no idea. That's what he's leading to. That Kalim are the key to revealing what's in the air. Even earlier, when we learned this at length, he said, even if the air has chesed and gvura in it, a shape, and it's not like tinted glasses and in neutral, but even that needs the Kalim to reveal it, because it's too amorphous, it's too abstract there. Here too, he's going to end up saying it's machshavas nalamis. All this is there before, but without the container, the air on its own, its nature is not to be confined. The bottom line is what Tayu is adding here, that you see the tenuous relationship, a very fragile relationship between Eid and Kalim. It's not like Eid is just easy going and just ready to settle. You better have the right conditions for it to be there. In the wrong conditions, Eid is out of here, because Eid's nature is one that ascends. That's the real bottom line here. So even though, that's what he's saying, that even though there's an abundance of energy and on its own, it may not be able to containable, but that's the whole purpose of containers, is to create a situation where it can be contained. Yeah.
I want to go further. I want to go say that without the finite, you would not have the infinite.
That's what he's called. That's what the Rebbe Kivantel das Gdelim. The Rebbe Rashab is saying more or less that. That's what he's leading to. But he's meticulously going through an example. He wants to really give it understanding. Remember, all these things in Elokus are the Chiddush of Chassidus is what that it takes divine concepts which on their own don't really have language, and give us language and also examples. See, even when we learn this, we're using examples. At the end of the day, all this is using examples from our lives. It's not just, we're not just talking abstract concepts. We're using examples. Because all this, when you and I, we learn this, what are we thinking? We think about a flame in a wick. We think about the sun. It's all Gashmizdika examples for a very Ruchnizdika concept. That itself is part of the process. But if you really want to understand Eid and Keli are conceptual Eid and Keli. They're not a physical flame in a container. But you have examples for it, like, to be able to relate to it. Okay, now comes the parentheses. Okay, how long is this parentheses? It's a long one. Okay, I love these long parentheses. They sure take you on a ride. Now it's around, I think, there's a few inside. Is that the one? No, or there's a one also in the middle somewhere.
There's a middle parentheses.
Okay, we'll do them all. Fine, as has been the custom. Okay, this is fine. Okay, Okay, Ukiydu, as it's known, the parentheses. The Riba came the Tikkun Mitzad HaBitl Dafke. Okay, so he's going now a little further deeper analysis into the nature of how Tikkun, the world of repair, actually repairs the imbalance of Tayu. So he's introducing the word Bitl. It's known that the Riba Kelim, the many containers, as he said, what means many? That they're conducive to be able to contain and settle and integrate the energies. By the way, many examples of this, anyone in engineering knows this very well. The whole chiddush of microprocessors, like you see in your computer, you look at a motherboard or the boards, they're able to concentrate in such small little areas, such intense power that the regular computer today once needed 3 blocks. Is really the ability to measure energy. Because once upon a time, why couldn't they do it in small? Because you need so much energy, you need a lot of containers. Here it's a small container, but it's still a way that makes the container that measures, because the energy is tailored. That's why you have to have all these fans. Your fan, because the heat that it's going on there, the energy that's going on is unbelievable. And that's a challenge. For example, when you have an overload, a surge, power surge, what's happening? Too much air. So what happens? It breaks the keli. The circuit breaks. It's a perfect example of Shviras HaKelim. So it's all about the fitting of it. Now, if the container is not made of the right substances, like for example, copper is a very good conductor, one of the best. I think what's even better than copper is something else, but it's very, very expensive. So they don't. And also, it's not. You can't make it into pipes. Like the mile of copper is that's a great conductor, and it has strength. You can turn it into a pipe, or you can turn it into a wire. Gold is an excellent conductor, but it's very porous. It's very soft. Silver is not a good conductor. Yeah. So what's a conductor? A conductor basically is conducting energy. Not everything is fitting. Like for example, put a piece of metal and try to light a flame on it. No flame is going to go. You need to have oil or a proper wick. If the wick is too wet, etc., etc. This is why Tubov is Yem Taber Magel, the breaking of the axe, because of the wood started getting moist, because the sun is not burning as much. So bottom line is, I'm just trying to use examples. These examples are excellent examples to understand the balance. And a container, of course, is a critical thing. It's not about how much energy there is. It's true that they have to minimize the flow of energy. It shouldn't overwhelm the container. That's why you have what they call circuit breakers. But at the same time, the container is critical for the conducting. Today they're looking for the superconductor. A superconductor means there's zero resistance. Because at the end of the day, when energy is flowing through something, there has to be some resistance and therefore a weakening of it. So let's say electricity flowing from a source to there, at the end of the day, it's not going to be the same intensity 100 miles away as it is there. It's pretty close, but by nature. So superconductors are what they're looking for, where there'd be a real tikkun. Elam tikkun is a superconductor. Keli and Eid, complete perfect flow. It's like a newborn child. When you breathe, you see a newborn child breathe, you see the lungs go up and down, up and down. The heart is a healthy child. Once we start breathing in toxins, we don't use all of our lungs. Our blood isn't flowing so smoothly. You have fat in there. You have fatty substances. The arteries get thickened, blocked, etc. God forbid. So you see right here, these are all examples. I just wanted to drive it to point home. But bottom line of Kalim revealing. See, till now in the previous Maimar, when he's speaking about Mispar number, he was talking about more intensity, quality, quantity, the number of this world, the number of a higher world. Here he's talking a lot more also, Yeah. Here he's talking more an additional component, which is that the energy actually ascends. There he's talking about energy is intense, and it's in qualitative level, it's very powerful. Here he's talking about its nature is not to be grounded. So you need to have something that grounds it strongly, and that's the keli. So now in this parentheses, going back to the parentheses, what I just said was not relevant to the parentheses. I just as I was starting to read, I realized I just wanted to spell it out a little more. And so now, what is the ribui hakelim mitzad bittul? It's not just someone that's creative figured out how to make more containers to contain energy. Like I just said with the conductors, you don't need bittul. Even though it's also bittul at the end of the day. It's interesting, the smaller the containers, the more they're able to hold in a way.
Right, it's not size, it's the material.
Right. And it's also, and also we learned before, remember we said that there's the number in containers which is just a lot volume, quantity. Then there's the number where you, through Aveda, when you bittul, through the Aveda of bittul, you diminish the containers.
That can hold
more energy, yeah. So it all comes down to what. So we say ribui hakelim is also here exactly. He's saying it's not bittul because sometimes ribui hakelim is the opposite. It's got less bittul. They're more yeshes, so there's more fragmentation. Specifically because of its subjugation, its sublimation. The word I usually use for bittul is suspending yourself, suspension of self. Because annihilation is not right. You don't want to say bittul as in as in, what's the word they use for bittul, like in bittul beribim, a nullification, right, because that has a negative implication. Okay. So it's that's the union, that's the meaning of behind the fact that in Atzilus and Tikkun, every midah, every emotion breaks down into many details, into kama pratim, into numerous details. Yeah. Like chesed will have in it also gvura. Love will also have within it discipline. The same thing, discipline will have within it love. In Tikkun specifically. In Torah you don't have that. Torah is mi'at kelim, remember. That's the whole thing. The mi'at, see, in Torah, mi'at kelim is not mitzad bittul, it's mitzad yashis. In Tikkun, ribi kelim is not mitzad yashis, but mitzad bittul. So, you got to have to halt cup here. Because it's not mathematical, because it's a whole, everything turns over. So therefore you see there's a ribi chalkas pratim. Like you look at the human body. It works so well together, but it's also made up of a tremendous amount of details. And through this, he means through the bittul. Well, no, through the fact that they all contain each other, and there's such a breakdown, through this is the unity, the yisachdus, the union between love and discipline. All this comes because of bittul, because of the sublimation, the subjugation. That there shouldn't be a midah v'kav echad. It shouldn't just be, I'm chesed, you're gvura, we don't know each other. We're separate. Kim yir kolul gam ma midah havchis. Rather, it should be in a way that it encompasses and includes also its antithesis. It's the opposite. It's contrasting emotion. And where does this bittul come from? Because you could ask immediately, midas I usually don't have bittul. When your person is completely passionate about something, it's not like suddenly they think about bittul. So where's it coming from? In tikkun. So it's coming from meichen. The bittul in these emotions is coming from the mind. She'em b'chin is bittul, because the mind by nature is in a state of bittul. Remember before, meichen is eir and midas hakelim. I don't know if that's where he's going, but I just want to point that out. So meichen are bittul. Because mayach, if you remember at length, we discussed, it was around chapters in the 30s, remember we discussed how amid is shanirgish hayesh, you feel something. Meichen is, you want to know what the subject says. What is the subject? Without negiyah, not without negiyah, whether I like it or I don't like it. So you can think about something, you may end up liking it, but while you're in the process of the meichen part, what's only relevant is what is it? Whereas a midah asks the question, what's in it for me? Yesh, mashe, the ani within it. So,
Hagasha.
Yeah, the hagosh is hayesh, right, the hagosh. So, meichen is bittul. Shem b'chin is bittul, shezel kol inyan ha-meichen is b'chin is bittul dafka. This is the whole inyan of meichen. It's not just an incidental thing that the mind happens to have bittul. The whole point of meichen, understanding, comprehension, is a state of bittul. Explicit dafka specifically. The inyan ha-yeshus hu hepach ha-meichen ha-mitim. It's good that he adds ha-mitim. Yeah. Because yeshus, arrogance, self, interest, is the opposite of true meichen. U'kamaymer kol gei sheita. That's good. I like that. Because they kol gei sheita, you say because arrogance is shtus. No, if you're arrogant, it's hepach ha-chachma.
That means you're not objective.
That's why. What does he say meichen amitim? Because you see people who are very smart, they have a very nice ego, and so it's not just their midas are in control. It's because their meichen is not meichen amitim. Because meichen could also be controlled by the midas. People, for example, falsify data. Scientists, because they get their own self-interest in the way. So meichen amitim, person who's a real meichen amitim, will not let subjective emotions impact. Yeah. True intelligence and mind is a state of bittul specifically. Why is this the case? Why is meichen this way? So, generally, before I'm reading further, sometimes the explanation is what he says here, sometimes the explanation is because meichen by definition is analysis of something. analysis of something, Meichen itself tells you, if you let your negate to come in, you're not going to get the real picture of what's going on here. Because you're going to think, what's in it for me? Once you think what's in it for me, you're not going to really get a picture. But on a deeper level, what Meichen really is what he says here. That you understand and comprehend something that is above you. I just want to point out, I don't know where it's going. Above doesn't always mean that it's actually higher than you, it means it's beyond, it's outside of you. So if you bring you into it, you're undermining your meichen. But l'mayla men, it could also be godliness, obviously, which is why sometimes it says, I don't know where it's going here, but I'm just pointing this out, just for the record, it's because sometimes it says that the chochmas chesenius, or chochmas ha'elam, science, is also you understanding something outside of you and objectivity. But because it's understanding existence, it adds yeshus. Not because meichen is yeshus, but the understanding of it leads you into being more you, so to speak. But meichen there too is objective, could be objective. So sometimes meichen l'mayla men, meaning when you talk, however, when you use meichen for God, there's b'chlal, it's not about you. It doesn't make you bigger to understand God. On the contrary, it shows you how the world doesn't exist. But science is predicated on the world exists, so it has to make the world stronger. I know myself more, I know the world more. But I'm just pointing out, I don't know if that's what he's saying, but bottom line is he wants to say that bittul, where does bittul come from? Because meichen comprehends and understands. How does it pale? Okay, fine. Yeah, I think that's why because a lot of these ideas were said earlier. I'm not taking it from, Ibam said these things before. Remember about how does it pale b'chinas bittul b'nefesh? And being that it's your understanding and comprehending something above you, so what does it do? It affects bittul. If it's about you, or about lower than you, let's say, you want to understand what food you're going to eat, that can't bring you bittul. You may need a little bittul to understand the food before it's the interest it has. But the end result is, it's not going to make you more bittul, it's going to make you a bigger fresed, usually. Anyway. Another parenthesis in the parenthesis. Okay, you see why it's a parenthesis, because he's not talking directly about the theme of Eir and Keli, he's talking now the cause of the bittul in Tikkun as opposed to the lack of bittul in Toyo. But just to not forget, the theme is that Eir is nature's exploration. But remember, every time he says the Maimon Muzga, it always adds Havana to the whole thing, because at the end of the day, the exploration or the ascent of the Eir is what causes bittul. As well, as we learn elsewhere. The dveikus of the air is what brings bittul into the keli. Precisely that it doesn't want to enter the keli, that's what... Because we said before, meichen is introverted. And now he's saying meichen is what causes bittul in the kelim, so to speak, or in the midas. Anyway, let's continue what he's saying here. We'll go back to that as we finish the parentheses. V'hameichen de sitrachne in the parentheses, within the parentheses, and the meichen from the other side, heim b'chinas yeshus. They're in a state of self, or ego, arrogance. I saw a person who was wise in his own eyes. He's aware that he's wise, basically. And meant as a chacham. So this is a Mishnah for sure, right? I saw a person, a man, who thought he was a wise guy. Ukidua be'inyan koyin oin. What's the meaning of koyin oin? Oin is usually a negative thing. What's a koyin? It's a koyin that's a psul.
Does that mean oven like straight?
No. There's the oven. Sometimes it's no. This is the aleph oin.
The oven means straight. So the person have his own doubts, his own way of looking.
Sometimes no, but here koyin oin maybe. I have to look it up, but koyin oin.
It's Yisra talking about Yisra. The
koyin that were mashamish in the fake temples that they erected in the times of it.
So it was like perceived godless. Basically, there was like arrogant leadership. So you're not talking about those that pay to go into the.
No.
You're talking about the Baal, the Baal or something.
Yeah.
It's basically a false prophet, a false priest. But Oin must be something connected to intelligence. So like it's a type of distorted, like misplaced. Okay, we'll look it up. But basically, kidu being kainain. I mean, it means kidu. It means the subject is discussed. He's talking about here meichen of sitra achra. But a kedusha in holiness, intelligence is specifically in a state of bittul and subjugation, sublimation. V'yesh leimer, we can say the fisha meichen the kedusha in kelim la inyan hamuvan hamusig, because intelligence and holiness, the containers are containers for the subject matter that you want to comprehend. Shenirgish Ayin hamusig. And all that you care about is to understand the subject matter. And that's why this type of meichen is in a state of bittul. That a bittul hu me'in hamusik b'meiche. Because the bittul is coming, that's what I was saying earlier. The bittul is not necessarily coming purely because it's godly, but it's becoming, you're focused on the subject matter, not on yourself. In the comprehended idea in the mind. And that idea within your mind is above you, and that's why it causes affects the bittul, effectuates the bittul. Lo yahasoga atzma. The inyan, in other words, the subject is what you care about. Not that you understand it. Not that I understand. So even though intelligence is not with the word I in it, but still, in intelligence itself, subtly, there's two levels. There's the idea that you want to understand, and there's no I altogether, and then there's hasoga, that he's focusing on the comprehension of it. Let's see what's going on with that. But the meichen of sitrach are not fitting or conducive containers to receive the energy, the idea. So therefore the thing that they are comprehending is not felt and sensed by them. That's why they're in a state of yesh. My explanation of this would be, in other words, he's not talking here that one is discussing science and one is science is also understand. One is not discussing mitzias of the world and one is discussing godliness. That's not what he's saying here. In other words, it's not the difference here on the concept. You think about God, so obviously it's going to bring bittul.
Both could be thinking about the same concept.
Right, exactly. Both could be thinking about a thing, but one is focused and complete. Basically, one is not sensing themselves while they're thinking. All you're focused on is understanding what the subject is. The inyan hamusik. And the other one is focusing on the hasaga. I'm interpreting this to mean, I'm not saying it's the only interpretation. Hasaga means that somewhat, ich will verstehen. It's like, I want to come away, say, I understood it, I got it, before someone else did. Whereas if somebody, for example, cares about the subject, doesn't really care who's going to,
I don't think it's more than the word nirgash, it's a very key word there. The first one is nirgash in hamusik.
But he says two things. But look.
And the second one says it's not a kid.
Yeah, but read before a few lines before. So he says, she says this. He says the fish yesh leimer. He says yesh leimer. One second. But and the harya bitlu be inyan hamusik b'meiche v'loy hasog atzma. What does that mean?
In other words, it's not very understanding, it's for the topic text.
Right, that's what I'm focusing on. I agree. And as a result of that, one, the Indian hamusik is nirgish by him because that's what he's focusing on, where the other one who's focusing on the hasag itself, on comprehension, is not focusing on the thing itself, he's focusing more on the comprehension of the thing.
What does it mean then that the Kli Moching and the Sitra Achar aren't able to take the self, just to understand?
I want to finish the subject before I comment on that, but my inclination to say that is because they begin with, what's Meichen Sitra Achra? It's Sitra Achra looking to preserve itself. It uses this mind not to grow or to understand something, it's using his mind to self-preservation. So its focus then is going to be on the Hasaga, not on the Inyan Hamus. It doesn't really care about you. Now think of it like this. A selfish person. He sits, but he's smart. So he sits with you, he wants to figure you out because he wants to manipulate you. He doesn't care about you, the Indian Hamusik. He cares about what you are going to be for me. So the Hasaga. That's how I would say. The thing is, he's not saying it in such grubber terms, but he's definitely saying the difference between Dover Hamusik and Hasaga. And that's why one is margish, the Inyan HaMusig, one is not. Why is he not feeling why in Sitra Achra does he not feel the thing that he's understanding? No, but why? But that's a circular logic. Why is he not a Keli? Like exactly, because he doesn't care about the Dover HaMusig, he cares about the Hasaga. That's why. You're correct, but the question is the reason for it. I'm explaining what I think it means here. If someone's another explanation is possible, let me continue on. The jury's still out completely. I mean, based on what I'm reading, that's what it sounds like. Okay, let's see here. And so Yesh Leimer also, so clearly it's a Chiddush Dover here. And this would be, in other words, he's not speaking about the Chefze. In other words, that if you think about godliness, it brings bittul. You think about Yeshus, about existence, it brings no bittul. He's not talking about it. He's talking about the method of thinking. He's made it. It's an unbelievable thought if this is correct. Yeah. There's no selflessness in Sitra Achra. That's the thing. That's the Yeshus of the Kelim. Remember, the point of all of this is to say that the Ribui HaKelim is because of its selflessness, because of its... Okay, let me just say 1 second. Let me just see something. This is all still a parenthesis within a parenthesis, gentlemen, right? Yeah. So let's continue. Okay, so loy hasogatzma. Famechis yachn enim ken rein lekabel erval ken ina dover musig nirgish behem. Lechen b'chinis yes. So the inyan ina dover musig, the subject matter is not sensed by them. That's why they stay in a form of yesh. V'zehu shagam shemevinim inyanim belakus, and that's why a person meichen, even meichen of Sitra Achra, even though they may comprehend divine matters, kamoy bri yesh ma'ayinu kahai gav. Like they're contemplating on the concept of creation ex nihilo, which means creation of existence from nothing. Nevertheless, they're not bottled by it. They understand it, or else he wouldn't be talking about it. They're not just, they understand the idea, but it doesn't affect them to become humbler people. Yeah, because by them it's only the comprehension, it's pure seichel. It's a little subtler than what I said. I said because it's self-interest. It's purely comprehension. They like the comprehension. They like the idea. But they're not thinking about Yesh Ma'ayin, I was created by God, and therefore, I'm... They learn it like a scholar. Yeah. I was saying more self-interest, but it's a subtle, but it's the same idea. Okay. Aval Meichen de Kedusha, however. So here goes both ways. Meichen de Sitra Achra, when it thinks about God, it's not doesn't personalize it. And Meichen de Kedusha, even when it thinks about the Welt, it thinks about the thing, not about itself. Not about itself. Aval Meichen de Kedusha harim kelim haruim la'ir. In Meichen de Kedusha, they are fitting, conducive containers to the light and energy. When they comprehend a divine subject matter, they sense and feel the subject, and it affects you. It's like negate to you. So it's interesting. So in other words, because the Chedi was saying Meichin doesn't think about what it means, what's in it for you. That's the real nature of Meichin. He was saying the opposite, that Meichin causes bittul. But he's again talking about a divine subject matter. If it wasn't a divine subject matter, this rule may not apply completely. So there's a lot of ways to analyze this. But it's interesting, he's still talking about Eris and Kalim. So in other words, this is the parentheses within the parentheses, by the way. We haven't yet finished the parentheses itself. So bottom line is that Kalim and the bittul of Atzilus is what causes it to have those Kalim. Just a second, please. Okay, so there are the two aspects that I was saying. One is, he's really not discussing here, elsewhere he discusses that when you think about things that are about Yeshem, Mitzias, about existence, it makes, at the end of the day, it makes you a bigger entity. Think about godliness, it makes you a small entity. But in godliness itself, it can be the two ways. Meichen de Sitra Achra focuses on the comprehension, not on the understanding of the matter. So it's like a concept. It's like academic. Right, like a scientific academic theory. Whereas a person who's going to the Kedusha learns the right kelim is that learning the subject. What am I learning here? It's not like Yesh Mayin is just another subject like 2 + 2 = 4 and a bunch of other theories. And that subject matter is what causes the bittul. But I would go deeper. It's because the meichen are going, by nature, go out of oneself. That's what he said. The meichen go out of yourself. They're not focused on self. That's why I added that. And with asaga, why by meichen siddach is focused on asaga? Why doesn't it focus? Because it's about self. The self is involved in the process. So it's interestingly, because the self is involved in the process, it's invested in being academic and not letting it affect itself. Understand the twist here? Because usually you say meichen, just let's talk about the subject matter. Why are you talking about its relevance to us? But it's not pshat klippa sitzach the objective. It's because I don't want it to affect me, because I'm thinking about me. I don't want this, I'm not interested in changing. In Kedusha, Kedusha is the other way around. We're also thinking about the subject of it, but I'm not letting my ego or my self-interest. And if it's about Yesh Mayin, it has implications and it affects me. In other words, the meichen goes all the way. It doesn't just stick theoretical. So the twist is that the theoretical person may argue, I'm more objective. You're the one that's letting it affect you. But in truth, it's the other way around. Because why isn't it affecting you? Because you don't want it to affect you. Because you're maintaining a separation. It would be like the doctors in the Holocaust. We're doing medicine. They don't care if it's a human being or not. Medicine. So you think they're detached? No, they're not detached. The opposite. The whatever was the self-driven thing didn't let them see the conscience and implications of what they're doing. That type of detachment is not necessarily objectivity. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So now back to outside of this parentheses. That's just the halt cup. Where did this parentheses begin? Okay. So now we understand there is a sitrachra and gedusha. Now we're going back to before the parentheses. What was it? Now, remember he said, Atzilus, the reason for the ribu kelim of Atzilus, the many containers, is because of its bittul. That's why you have chesed within gvura, and gvura within chesed, and all that is because of the bittul. And explained why. How does that bittul happen in the midas? It comes from meichen. Intelligence, the intellect, is what causes this bittul. So now he's going back and saying, and that's why intelligence also has many details. For the same reason, like he said before. Why? This is the reason, the cause, why every intellectual subject, every subject and idea comes in many comes in many details. And these details includes also different details and also those that are contradict each other. That too comes from bittul, from the selflessness. Like for someone who's increasingly arrogant, he's very stubborn. He holds on to his idea. And he doesn't leave any room for the idea, for the thought, the svara of his friend, of a colleague, to think maybe there's something right there. He's stubborn and locked in his position. Someone who's humbler, humble, he thinks, he considers, he recognizes, he acknowledges, he validates. Yeah, it's also, it's part of that. You know, I use bottle because I'm trying to be consistent with the bittul before, but you can use it. Yeah. But here is but the how do you cheshev b'svaris chaverei? Cheshev means two things. It can be he thinks about a svara, but also cheshev means he recognizes it, he values it. in the thought of his colleague, Gam Shuhu Hepech Sfarasa, even if it contradicts and it's opposite of his own theory. Umakabla es Meitzah Lenochin. And he receives and he accepts its results, its Mukabla im, I'm sorry, I could have said Uli im tzol lenochin. Im. I said S. Yeah. Mukabla im tzol lenochin. And he will accept it if he finds it to be accurate. In other words, he will consider it and he won't just outright reject it because of his own arrogance. This is a nice piece. This in a way explains the Gemara why Hil Amvison, that's why Allah Kamei because Hoye Magdim as far as Beshamet himself. Shamet, yeah, so Ukamoy can close in Mashakol Eir Seichel Mischalkel Kama Pratim V'Kam Pratim Havchim. So this is an example. What do we see from this example? We see from the example that Bittel in Meichin allows for and tolerates and accepts many details, even contradictory ones. Whereas Meichin of Yeshus, of Sitra Achra, will be far more locked in. No, this is the way I understand it. Even Meichin. So the truth is he's adding something here that was not in the parentheses. In the parentheses, he was not talking about tolerance or that. He was just talking about whether you are focusing on just the theory, the hasaga, or you really care about the matter. So it's a different element. So Bittel here brings details. Remember, all this is going back to why there's Ribui Kalim. So, the same thing is in general. We saw every idea, energy of an idea, breaks down into many details, and also opposites, also contrasting details. Because this is what comprehension means. That is broken down into details. I'm talking about hasaga as bina, not chokhmah, obviously. When you know something, shitchis means in English superficially. In a superficial type of understanding, knowledge, you don't see details at all in the subject matter. You just see the general picture. But when he comprehends the idea, he comes to and arrives to the details within it. And a good comprehension. So hasaga is details, and hasaga teva, he also sees it because it means he's covering his bases. He's not leaving any stone unturned, as they say. You cover every aspect. Yeah. I always say one of the greatest things in this process, I know we did this when we worked in Sichos, you really want to get Libun Hilchos, clarity, crystallization, is that you come up with an idea, that it's a great idea, and then the best thing to do, you don't even have to wait for somebody to challenge you, is to say to yourself, okay, let's go the exact opposite extreme. Let's think, what happens if I did the exact opposite of what I came to? And then you let it argue with each other, and you come to a far better understanding, because you either come back to your conclusion, to your original idea, or you see its flaws. And it's what most people don't find easy to do. Because you come with an idea, okay, that's my idea, and let's move on. But if you're able to challenge and stretch it, I'm like in my office, sometimes we have an idea, someone has a brainstorm, let's do this. Many times I have this brainstorm, then I make a meeting, and then I become devil's advocate against my own idea. But it's not to be crazy, it's adrabi, you want to really see, 1 second, let's say we didn't do that, what would be? Well, let's say we did the opposite, what would happen? And then you really have something to compare to. You can say, okay, now let's see the pros and cons, and you usually can refine your idea by including more, it becomes more clear through the opposite extreme. Look, Rabbi Zera went to forgot the whole Talmud Bavli to learn Talmud Yerushalmi, the methodology, as the Rebbe says, not the fact. So anyway, so bottom line is opposite. That's hasaga teva. The ancient. Hasaga teva and good comprehensions comes also the Indian. You arrive also at opposite details. And to the point that how they're both true. In other words, you recognize the value, the pros and cons, and all the details. It's also known that the more you arrive to the depth of idea, you also come into more detail. So, an additional point he's making. Besides the fact that bittul and true intelligence brings you to review all details, even contradicting ones, conflicting ones. Another thing is depth of an idea brings you to many more details. Someone who understands an idea deeper than someone who understands it more superficially, it'll break down into more details. Because that's what depth does. You realize the nuances, you realize all the aspects of it. The kol zeh mitzad bittul dafke. All this breakdown that he's talking about comes from bittul. Uma bittul demeichen nimshech habittul b'midas. Now he's going back to the beginning of the parentheses. This bittul, this sublimation in intelligence, is what brings the sublimation in the emotions in Atzilus. If you remember, Chesed should have Gvura and Gvura should have Chesed. Liyaz behem ribei apratim kanal, that they too should have, that they will have also all these details. The Chesed doesn't just say, I'm Chesed, I don't relate to Gvura. That Chesed should have Gvura within it. The Gvura should have Chesed within it. Okay. V'nimtzed ribui hakelim, the ribui hakelim. So we find from all this whole parenthesis, that the abundance of containers in Atzilus, hu mitzad habitl, comes because of its selflessness, sublimation. Shaydezehem kelim ruyim elair. Through this, they become conducive, appropriate, fitting containers to the energy. This is the long parenthesis. So all this is to come to explain how in Tikkun, as opposed to Tayu, Kelim and Eris, Kelim reveal the energy. I'm just wondering, you always like practical, so-called models. So it would be like the difference between how would Meichen Sitra Achre tell a story, talking about Sipur, and how would Meichen Kedusha tell a story. I'm just thinking along those lines. I'm trying to think what would be the difference. So one, based on what he said, one would be talking about, obviously would tell it in a way that's very detached, wouldn't be personal.
Headlines. How would Meichen Sitra Achre?
Yeah, one would also break into, the Kedusha would of course break into details. It would be alibad de nafshi, because it would be personal. Because we're talking about kelim of Atzilus, tell the story correctly. That's the point of this whole thing. Whereas kelim of Tayu don't tell the story properly, because they're too few. I'm just applying this into a practical storytelling mode. Maybe lessons on how to tell a story. One second. I just want to go back to get the flow here. Make sure I have the train of thought. And all this is the raya from Tayu that Yitakelim Shloih Kelim Ruyim.
So don't tell the story properly.
Right. The Hari Yashrim say didn't even firace yet, but that it didn't lead to that yet. But that's where he's going. So the Kelim don't tell it. And in Tikkun, the Chiddush is you have this abundance of containers that reveal the light, and that's all because of Bittul. That's the point here that he made. That's the big parenthesis, that is the Bittul that does it. So the Bittul that brings the Ribui, the abundance. In Torah there's lack of Bittul, so it doesn't have the abundance, it has diminished containers, so the energies expire, and so on. It would also be someone who has no patience, like, tell a story, 2 minutes. Someone who has patience will sit with you, tell you the details. And tell you is an impatient world in that sense. A lot of energy. Kelim are very weak. So it's like, very little. I got it. I got the model in marketing. Tell you is low attention span, and Tikkun is attention span. This patience and,
Yeah, it's an interesting.
Yeah, that's another element. Patience, impatience. You said tolerance, intolerant, but it's also patience. You see this. You see parents and so you see people. Someone's rushed. They care. They care about what about the subject matter, so they're going to tell it to you in detail. Yeah, it's interesting, the whole thing. So now outside of the parentheses, let's go back to before the parentheses. What was the last line?
Besides the container, the wick.
Yeah. Well, the zeis is chaz. Just 1 second. Okay. Ribei HaKelim. The parentheses added, why does Ribei HaKelim bittul? And now he's going back, and when there's abundance of containers, Barabis HaKelim, as the Kelim increase, as they increase, Barabis, Yisraba Eir V'Hamshacha B'Yeser. Also the energy increases, and the energy in the transmission increasingly grow. Increasingly grow. Commissioner Kosov, Ein Eid Kli V'Yamed Hashemen. Story with Elisha. Yeah, where he said, Kelim Reikim Al Tamiti. So bring the containers. As long as they brought containers, the flow continued. But then, yeah, when there's no more keli, I need keli. When there's no longer container, v'yamad Hashem, the flow of the oil stopped. So in other words, the kelim. But here we're talking about kelim mitzad bitl. Remember that. We're not talking about abundance of kelim because they've gone wild.
It made it the nest should have a place to rest.
Yeah. Yeah. One second. Let me just. So in other words, now it goes the other way around. The air. 1 second. The bittul of Atzilus. Yeah, but I was thinking till now that the air also is what brings the bittul into the kelim. But then the kelim, because as they increase, so brings more. It's like a two-way street. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Look, it goes like we see also with what we spoke about the limbs. The person, the healthier the body, the more energy it will draw. Listen, we have muscle. You develop the muscle, the chayas grows, energy grows.
So, what comes first, the keli or
the chicken or the egg? It depends whether.
The reason I'm asking.
Depends whether you're standing on your head or you're walking on your feet. What do you mean? It's talking about ma'ila matlam matlam.
We say if you make.
That's a vumaret.
You say that you make too big a keli, it has the opposite effect. If you make too small a keli, it doesn't draw down the earth. So how do you get it just right?
Oh, my friend, there's the whole Ayin Beis. And not only that, I'll tell you even more. At the end of this volume, there's like 20 chapters just on this question. And he brings about 4 different imbalances. Too much air, too little energy. Too much energy, too little keli. Too much keli, too much this. Then they're both too much, or they're both too little. It's exactly correct.
So where we going? We're going back and forth. So I mean, where do we exit?
You're asking this to hunt the hund bagram. What do you mean? This is the key to the whole balance. Why don't you ask a better way? God wants us to be a yesh, independent. He doesn't want you to annihilate yourself. And you have to think b'shvili. You have to think about your interest. Where does your interest stop, and when do you care? Like, where is ein ani mili, and when is imanila atzmi mo'ani? So there's no quick answer to this question. It's case by case, and in situations. The way the Torah puts it, just briefly, is there's a balance. For example, there's a time when you wake up in the morning, you're davening or learning. So that's a time where you're more involved in personal aved, sheit atzmacha. And then comes hanig b'minig derecheret. Then comes gmilas chasad. But then we see also that before you daven, you're supposed to give tzedakah. Exactly. So in other words, there's a constant. If a person really has bittul is the secret to the balance. By the way, it's yeshes that create the problem. Because the yesh decides, I want to take care of myself now. So too much kelim. Well, sometimes the yesh goes the other way around. No kelim at all. And that balance is a challenge, but it all comes down to bittul. Look, your father in Pittsburgh could have said, 1 second, what's my interest here? Maybe it's a great job, Just give me an example. The Rebbe Zuck, that's the emes. I'm just giving an example, this from your own story. And sometimes it's the other way around. What do you mean the other way? Not Nishtam Mefolkness, God forbid, but sometimes, on the contrary, the Rebbe told the Jews to stay in Russia. It wasn't easy. Those that insisted but left because the Rebbe saw there's a shlichus, and that's it. So my point is, it's not always that simple in how to. There's no one-step formula. First of all, we have a Torah that tells us more or less what's right, what's wrong, and then different circumstances. Why would one person the Rebbe say, yeah, you want to move from America to Israel, and the other person the Rebbe said no. It had a lot to do with what their shlichus was, and so on. So there's no quick answer. But the question is, of course, is the yesod of the whole thing. Where does it begin? Where does it end? It begins with bittul. Take out bittul from the picture, you got problems. no matter how. If you have big Eidus or big Kalim, if you don't have Bittul, there's going to be trouble. That's for sure. Because Bittul is like basically the so-called the balancing, it balances the equation.
No, Bittul to the Emes, not Stam Bittul.
No. Yeah. Bittul.
You have a flavor with the stocks. Two people had about the same stock. One guy the Rabbi told to sell, one was told to keep, right? And they both made.
Yeah.
Remember the story?
I remember that story, but I understand absolutely. The point, however, is let's go back to this. Okay,
Even if the guy would have lost the money in the stock.
I hope so. You know, I'm a chassid of the story of Shmuel Geradi. I don't know if I would have lost it, it would affect me. But
the story over there was that this guy, the stock went down.
Yeah.
And this one he told to sell, that's one he told to keep. So the one he told to sell is because a week later, or whatever it was like a couple of days later,
He needed the money.
He needed the money to invest somewhere else, and he made a lot more when he had held the stock. And the other one held it, and eventually went up, and they both went up. That's the one.
I know that I was against that, so I don't think you were telling me to hold it.
וברבא סקל is Rabbi והמשוך ביש כמו שכתוב אין עד כלי וימד השמש ואילו היה עד כלים, and if there were more containers היה עד ריבוי המשוך is. If there were more containers there would have been more transmissions and המשוך is more energy transmissions. Just give me a second, I gotta trying to understand why it's so important, the Ribuy HaPratim. He started the chapter by explaining that he's going to bring a raya to the need for how Keli is the thing that contains and grounds the energy. And now he's gone into focusing on the Ribuy, on the abundance of these containers. Just a second. Okay. So it's the abundance of the containers that come because of the bittul that draw down the energy. Okay, fine, yeah, that's it. So we see another thing here. In other words, we see two things. In Toyu, because of the diminished containers, the energies expire. So we see how energy on its own expires without the containers. In Tikkun, you see the opposite. That's the key. You see, because of containers, it draws down, and the abundance of containers draws down more energy. So you see how much the containers are critical in the flow. In other words, it's not just that Tikkun repairs that one small thing, that there was diminished containers and now there's more containers and therefore there's more energy. Now there's energy that stays, but actually it draws more and more energy because the containers, that's what they do. When they're healthy and they're properly balanced and they have the bittul that he described, the meichen affects, and the meichen of the thing affects the bittul because it thinks about.
Didn't tell you how
More seichel has more pratim because you tolerate another opposite, because you get depth deeper into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason why I'm just stopping, because it's so reminiscent to me. He's talking here so much about, he's not saying misper number, but ribui means number. Miut means less. So it's like it's almost the opposite of what he said earlier. If you remember earlier, he said, I mentioned it before, but I just want to go over it again. That's why because you can't deny, it's just coming after the previous chapters. He said that when it comes to misper eris, which is quality, means intensity, the higher you go, the more you have, and the lower you go, the more diminished it is. Okay, but that's not talking about expiration, that's just talking about energy. When you talk from containers like words, legabe machshava, you have less intensity, and it's interdependent. Less intensity, less air, but the lower you go, the more containers, because the more you break it down. And here he's adding that by the breakdown. But see, but that's why he said ribu mitzvah bitl. In other words, there's two ways that you could break down the number. You're breaking it down because we live in a material world, and we like quantity. Then you have less energy, more containers, less energy. Like the body, the legs have less faculties than the brain. But if you break it down, it's bitl. In other words, if bitl is the driving force in tikkun, then the breakdown brings a lot more energy. That's what was, I knew something was bugging me here. So he's adding that, and it's all in the context of telling the story, not talking about numbers. In other words, when you tell a story, that's when it works that way. That's what I think he's saying. He wants to say. So if you're not telling a story, so I tell you my number, 1,000,000. So by you don't appreciate. You have a number, 1,000,000. Okay, fine. I counted it myself. Remember my example you gave. I counted it myself, so I appreciate it. So when I tell you 1,000,000, I'm not really telling you the story. If I want to tell you the story, I would have to tell you what 1,000,000 really is. Let me tell you what 1,000,000 is. This. Tell a child 1,000,000. What do they know? In other words, you could share a large number, and it should have very little neshama in it, soul. Or you can share it; it should have a lot of depth and detail. And that's what he's saying here. So in interesting kalim with bittul, do that, because you could have the opposite. You can come to a place like we spoke. You could have, you go sometimes. Almost all great packages have nothing inside them. You go buy things, you buy a whole thing. It's like this size. You buy it; it's a little thing, because it's all marketing. They want me to appear like it's a lot. So they fill up. They fill it up with a bunch of fluff. So I don't want to say that, but by Chassidim they said, a certain part of the body was always an example of pure ungeblos. And so you have a lot of things like that. There are just a lot of what has a lot of air in it, like cotton candy, these type of things. That's like mostly in luft, but it looks big. The way we say there's chometz and matzah, that the bread, a lot of it is the air. It's inflated. It's not the bare minimum of the elements. It's ungeblos. Anyway, that's what was. I'm reading this. So it's just so reminiscent of the whole idea of number.
So you're saying if you have more kalim, it should be less head, right?
It's not a question. I understand. It depends what you mean by more kalim. Like let's say you have people. You open up a talk radio. You talk all day. They talk and talk and talk. Yeah. Then the Havli, you hear the Chacham speak. You say a few lines, and that few lines will give you your whole life. And here can bolben for years and say nothing. That to me, yes, much more detail, much more protein, much more kalim, but okay, pusta kalim. Then there's the other way around. But bitl is the balancing equation. Bring bitl into the picture, then the kalim can do that. You don't have bitl, then it's about.
But then, why wouldn't it work?
Anyway, I just wanted to.
Okay, so why wouldn't it work for the meaning for the million? You have the bittul in the. I know.
No, you could. No, it would.
And it would go further. I mean, if you're talking about it's where you start, it's
look, ultimately, because ultimately you want to, the interface, and the mamutza here, the intermediate, you want to combine quality and quantity. Like, you could ask a different question. Sometimes we say, like the Mishnah is Beloshen Ktsara. You said this example before. Gemara is Barichas. But the Mishnah has much more Eir than the Gemara is more Kalim. But in a certain way, when you break things down in detail, you get to a depth that you don't have in the Mishnah.
You own it.
Yeah, you own it, and also you reveal in the Mishnah things that you would not have known because it's being broken down. Or even Psukim. Like a midid later mizabarais. You look at a pasuk. One short pasuk, and even Gemara, you're going to have hundreds of pages on one pasuk, one word. So yes, b'zem Hashem is it's not a contradiction. You want to join the two. The worst scenario is where you have volume, quantity without quality. Another scenario is quality without quantity. You want both, and there's different circumstances. You need both. That's really the joining. In Atzilus you have that. But remember, Atzilus is not the Tachlis HaKavanah to come and data b'tachteinim. With Tachteinim here, everything is quantity. People measure by quantity. You have more money, you're a more valuable person. They don't value for quality. The people with the greatest quality are not even appreciated in this world. And in such a world, you want to come to appreciate quality. Like what's more powerful? When Eliyahu Novi says, "Lei be'esh v'le barash, v'le beruach, right? Is that the Seder? I remember the Seder exactly. And then killed Mamadaka. Which is more powerful? Or what's more powerful? The silence, the Aveda Sakhayanim Bechashoy, quiet in the Beis Hamikdash, or Aveda Salavim B'Shira? Huh?
Quiet.
Yeah, Bittel, and also I meant the more and Keli. Yeah, Kohen Ein is the opposite. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Listen, we didn't finish the subject. I'm just talking it out a little because it just brings it all together. And I want to also confuse matters. When he said earlier, remember, when you're mevatel the nefesh habamis, as it says, is mevatel the kelim. Bittel ha-kelim, that's when you have a lot more air. But that bittel ha-kelim is really diminishing chumris, not diminishing gashmis. And that's when mispar elam hazra becomes like mispar elam haba. So there's a lot of, you have to know vumered da punkt. It really does come down to two shtaim shem arba, like we spoke. There's the klal, the prat and the klal. Yeah. Okay, let's continue on here. I want to confuse matters. Let's go back. So, like you said with the shaman. Okay. And this is also the meaning of Hagdolas Hazah. So what's Hagdolas Hazah? Hagdolas Hazah is the Lashon Kabbalah for Hagdolas Hamidus. The maturity of our emotions. So when we're children, it's called Katnuzah. Emotions, someone says something to you right away, insulted. You don't have Gadlus HaMechen, and you have Katnus HaMidus. Gadlus HaMazah is essentially what happens as a person's Mechen grow, it also matures the Zah, the Midas. Shenasa Dea Mitzvahs. But it says in Kabbalah that in Aveda, that what I just said was, mature process. In Aveda, through mitzvahs, we strengthen, we grow. It's called Hagdolas Hazah. So he's going to explain what that Hagdolah is. The 248 mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs essa, correspond to the 248 organs of the king. Meaning of above. Adam Elyon, essentially. And that's why it's also connected to Ramach Evarim of ours, because we're B'Tselem Elokim. The Sefirah Achreidim spells out a lot of how the mitzvahs correspond to different parts of the body. The Bechinas, I once thought of writing a book on it. Really like going, have a picture of a body and go each mitzvah, which is which. I mean, there's the easy ones, but there's harder ones,
Where it is in the body.
Yeah.
I mean, like Tumas Amaisis, where it is in the body.
Yeah. Well, it says Yeah.
There's another part from that.
Yeah.
You can map it out.
You could do it online. It'd be very nice. You have a body, you magnify and say, here, mitzvah this. So that way, that's simple. If your eyes aren't working so well, here's the mitzvahs that you have to do.
That would be.
If you like.
Know exactly.
Chosh bereishe, yasik b'tei. The Rebbe once said, Chosh bereishe, yasik b'tei. It says, Chosh bezrei, yasik b'tei. Chosh b'raglei. The Rebbe says, what's going on? So the Rebbe said, because Teira is also like Zeis Teira Adam, that every part of Teira corresponds to part of the body. The problem is we don't know which part is which, so you have to learn all of the Kol Teira to fix any problem. But it's not like the same Teira. It means that part of the Teira that corresponds to that part of the body. You figure it out?
No, the word tzaddikim I know.
Yeah. Are there any stories like that? Okay. So Hagdolas HaMidus. Hagdolas Hazah through the mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs are the mach mitzvahs, so they help grow and improve the organs that they correspond to. The Bechinas Evrin, the Malka, and the Bechinas HaKelim, the Zah. What's Evrin, the Malka? When you say the kingly, or the king's organs, or king's limbs to be more precise, those are the containers of Zah, Kelim. A little Kabbalah here, but it's not. And through doing mitzvahs maisis, when you do mitzvahs, what are you doing? You're building containers. Because mitzvahs are with actions, maisis. Hainu tes pamim tes, which is the 9 times 9 kelim. It's scarless. Ubechol echad yesh reish teich seif. This is how you get to Ramach, by the way. So it's 81 times 3 is what? 243. This is Ramach is 244. Not sure. There's probably Hakel, 248. I'm sorry. Then there's the Hey Gvuras. That's how it works. Yeah. So it's Tes Pamim Tes, and each one is Reish Tek Seif. So 81 times that is 243 plus the Hey Gvuras. I don't know why it doesn't mention that, but okay. That's how the Ramach. So that's clearly the Kalim. That's containers, Aribui containers. All the mitzvahs.
What's the Tes Pamim Tes? The 9?
The 9 within, you don't count Malchus. It's like Malchus not count because Zoh is not Malchus. Zoh is 6.
So 9 times 9.
So it's 9 times 9 within the 6, basically. That's really what it is. It's broken down in places. Tes Pamim Tes it's a cloud. You don't count Malchus 9 times 9. Like sometimes Eser Pamim Es is 100.
9 times 3 because of the Reish.
Yeah, 81 times 3. Yeah. And then the 5, and that Varehim Magdilim. Oh, the Hechsadim. What am I talking about? I didn't my without reading last one. Okay, right. Hechsadim. Sorry, my mistake. Strike that. Hechsadim Hamagdilim. So with the Hechsadim, that's 248. I mean the Avona of the 9 times 9. In Eilat Torah he brings a few places. Basically, just a detailed Kabbalistic structure, but I'm sure in Aveda there's a description, explanation of what they are exactly. So, bottom line is that through mitzvahs you are Magdil Zah. So he goes, because what's one thing, what to do with the other? Here's again, you see the same idea. An abundance of containers, but what? Quality containers. We're not talking about containers, Tam. You're talking about containers that are doing mitzvahs, Tevarim. They draw down an abundance of energy.
For example, what do you mean?
I'll give you an example. There's a machlekes about two opinions about tzedakah. Should you give one big bundle or pruta pruta? So pruta pruta is much more details, but it has a quality in it that you don't have when you give one. I'm just giving you an example. There's other examples.
Even the same amount.
Yeah. More people, whatever it may be. We spoke about this. For example, you have 10 people who are talking shtusim. There's a lot of noise. 10 people who come together for a minyan is a shkin tasharya. What it says, and when they talk one thing, what does it cause? It causes death because it's pushed. And the other thing brings down a higher energy. In other words, ribui doesn't necessarily mean negative. It depends what it is. In mitzvahs, it comes down to why do we have so many mitzvahs? It says right? So the question is, what's the hirba? What does that mean? The answer is one answer is in order to be because the world is so multiplicity. So mitzvahs correspond to each part of the world. When you love somebody, like a child, and you give him a lot of something, it's coming from love. It's not. It brings more eris in that sense. It's in direct contrast to what he said earlier about. Okay. Shazel Maimer Azal. Okay, good. Shazel Maimer Azal Vasisa Meisam Mailan Yalechem Kilo Asuni. Vasisa Meisam is referring to the mitzvahs. Yeah, Atem Alosh. Yeah, I'll take it. No, it says Asisim Atem. Oisam. I'll take Oisam Atem. Right. But Kilasuni, because he's talking about building the Ramach Evarim de Malka. That's what he's saying. The Lechera Mau Ki'ilu Asuni. Why is it Ki'ilu Asuni? Like as if you. Let's just translate. Asisim Eisam, when you will do them mitzvahs, I will consider it as if you created me, as if you built me. Lechera seemingly Mau Ki'ilu Asuni. Why is it only Ki'ilu? The 248 commandments are the 248 Avarim. The question is why it's only Ki'ilu, right? Okay, we'll see from the answer. However, the inyan in this is the answer, is because through mitzvahs, through doing mitzvahs, you build abundance of containers. And I will consider it as if you created me, shaped me, shakelim, because the containers draw down the energy. Just like the limbs draw down the life force. All you have to do is repair the limb, and automatically the energy will be drawn down. Let's read on, because I'm not sure where he's going with this. And what's the meaning of asuni? This means that without the containers, the energy would not have been transmitted or drawn down. It would have been expired above. And through the containers, the energy was drawn down against its nature, which is to expire. Oh, it's not kilu asun. That's not the question. Why only kilu? No, maybe. Okay, let me see. And that's through the mitzvah specific asuni. That's why through the mitzvahs you've shaped me and created me through drawing down the air. No, the question was wrong. I asked the question wrong. The question is not why ki'ilu, isn't it this? The question is very simple. What do you need us for? Ramach Pekudim is Ramach Evarim. What do we have to do anything? Why do you need Asisa Mesam? Why do you need something to be shaped or created? It says Ramach Pekudim, the 248 mitzvahs are actually 248 limbs are correspond to 248 malah. What's missing? What's missing is that air on its own will not be inside the evarim. It's a geshmak types. In other words, why do we need to? Because it would be like evarim of a body that are not repaired or not healthy. So it's very nice, but they will not. So you need to have the asisa mesam, create the kalim, and repair the kalim. We're being mekayim the mitzvahs. That's what we're doing.
This is like the kalim.
Yeah, and without that, just to say Ramach Pekudim and Ramach Evarim is very nice, but it wouldn't be alive. Basically, it's the idea of drawing down. That he's explaining the Ma'amar Chazal. He's asking a question. Why is it? What do you mean Kila Asuni? What do you need us to? What do you need Asuni? Ramach Pekudim. It's a level. It's like saying Esesfiris or Esesfiris, because they wouldn't be Esesfiris if the Eris are not being drawn down to the Kalim. That's what he's saying here. Yeah. I see from the answer that's what he's saying. It's clear, it's very clear. So all this, wow, such an arichas here. I just don't want to get lost in the woods here, in the whole flow here. All this is coming to explain a pardes, telling the story. Yeah, no, but finishing is also requires understanding it. So I'm just trying to keep the flow here. So now he's gone to the details of the kalim. They draw down the details of the energies. And that's the Ribu Yakelim, Ribu Eir. Okay, that's the Magdolos Hazor, Ramach Evarim. Why? Because you need Aveda. Yeah, okay. So just like Evarim, without that's a Sunni. Because without a Sunni, without Kalim, if you don't build the Kalim, the air will just expire. And it's the Kalim that dissipate or expire, that will ascend. And through the containers, you draw it down against their nature. That's an important emphasis, because it would absolutely expire. In other words, you need a real effort to the gravitational pull. You need something to ground it. That's what he's saying. And that's why through mitzvahs dafka, specifically through mitzvahs asuni. What means asuni? Hamshachas eir. That's what asuni means. Drawing down the energy. Parentheses. V'amaimer ki'ilu asunu hu maimer hazoh. And who's saying it? Who's saying Kila Sunni? Because obviously can't be talking about God himself. God, we don't create God. Hazah, that's the expression, that's the Maimer Hazah. It's an interesting expression, Maimer Hazah. Yeah, right. Maimer Zah, meaning the statement from Zah. V'yashlemer gamken Asuni Loshen Hechrech. You could also say Asuni comes like Asiya, is a Loshen Kfiyah, Hechrech. You can also say Asuni is from the word hechrech. What does hechrech mean? Compel. Right. Or like you say, aseh l'charav. V'hainu kavyochel hachrichuni liyas b'chinas yirida. The Asuni doesn't just mean you create me, but you're forcing me, you're compelling me to be. It's a meridic asis. You should be in a state of descent, b'chinas sir adam, in a sir adam in the shape of a human, supernal human. Heipech teva er. Opposite of my nature, opposite of the nature of energy. So Eir is telling the Kalim, Erev Zah is telling the Keli, you're compelled, Al Korcha Chatachai, basically. Varezeh al derech Yisrael mefarnes in Savinu Shebashamayim is the expression. Right. That the Eden are mefarnes. They sustain and support our Father in heaven. What does that mean? Lias bechinas sir adam. Mefarnes is not, God forbid, atzmus, but for him to be, we draw down that the divine should be manifest in the structure of Atzilus, which is the Adam Elyon. Like it says elsewhere, nevertheless, you can't say it's actual, God forbid, an actual force, an actual coercion, like we shall explain nearby, besamach, very shortly. Okay. The same thing in Aveda Lias is Gal Se'era Ava Benefesh. Same thing as in Aveda, in our worship, in our service, for there to be the revelation of the love, of the energy of love in the spirit, in the soul. That's through the containers of Torah mitzvahs, specifically. The Vahafta begematria based Pomimer. Vahafta, Hashem L'Kacha, is gematria, is the same numerical configuration as twice Eir. So Ava is twice Eir. V'chol Eir tzarech l'kli. She is spoil ma Eir. And every energy needs a container that is affected and impacted by the energy. Like you said before, remember that the psila and the shaman have to be akeli to it. They have to be receptive. They should be subjugated and sublimated to the energy. And it should be in a state of closeness and cleaving to godliness, to the divine. And this comes through Torah mitzvahs. In other words, the Torah mitzvahs is what is the keli that creates that bittul within the person to the eir. And that's what brings av into the person. In other words, think about it like you said before, like in health. If the ivarim are not, if the limbs are not healthy, the energy doesn't flow into them. Here too, there's love in the neshama. But how is love contained? Why doesn't it expire? Why is it not for it to be grounded? Expressed, just like more energy in your muscles when you exercise the muscle. What's the exercise of the containers is Torah mitzvahs, and that brings the air, the base pamimer v'ahafta, love. That's why when you don't have the containers of Torah mitzvahs, you can't draw down. You can't draw down in it the energy of love. It has nowhere to manifest. Because the Aval Yena, the God love us is definitely drawn down through mitzvahs, through our mitzvahs specifically. Like it says, I've commanded you in all these little laws, liyira, that you should have respect. Or okay, so what's that? Oh, here we go. For you do, and it's known the koyal b'chinas yirei law. This pasuk liyira means yirei law, the higher yira, not yira sa'enish, not fear of punishment, but more of a state of awe of the divine. V'cheina avel yena. The same thing is with avel yena. In other words, he's bringing a raya. Yitzivinu mitzvahs is what brings liyira. The same thing, mitzvahs is what brings ava. There's no pasuk that says that the mitzvahs are the la'av. I mean, v'haftas Hashem Elokecha is itself. Then it goes v'shenantam levanecha. But that's how he's bringing the raya here. That the yira, same thing with ava, al yena. Actually, 1 second. Yira law is our yira, not God's yira. You're saying ava al yena is God's love to us? I don't know. I'm not sure what Aval Yena means. Let's see in a minute. I think Aval Yena doesn't mean God's love here. I think he means our super rational love, like Aval Rabbah. It looks like mashma like that because it's not like through mitzvahs God loves us because it looks like the opposite. It's mitzvahs that bring. That's what it looks like. And that's another contrast. And even love and awe, that's rational. That comes through our rational tools, in other words. is also specifically when there's the containers of Torah mitzvahs. So you have a few loys. We have loy gei chacham, loy gei what was the lashon? Kol gei sheita, and okay, just as another member chazal. The loy amoretz chassid. You can't have chassid, in other words. The chassid who bechinas chesed v'ava v'loy amaratzis.
No, amoretz chassid. In other words, you have to have the Torah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have Torah to be chesed. The chassid who bechinas chesed v'ava.
So v'loy
amoretz.
V'loy amoretz chassid, because.
But how do you read this? V'loy amoretz chassid, comma the chassid who bechinas chesed v'ava, comma v'loy amoretz.
No, chulu v'loy amoretz chassid. That's what it's trying to say. That.
And a person the amoretz does not have chesed. You understand? There's not a chassid. Yeah. Bottom line is Torah mitzvah is a keli for chesed. The Torah mitzvah is saying kelim shayadam yumshach bechinas era ava. Because Torah mitzvahs are containers that through them they draw down the energy of love. The Gaba mitzvahs ksiva sharanechem mitzavcha hayim alavavecha. By mitzvahs it says what I commanded you today alavavecha on your heart through your heart. Shadei mitzvahs say ratzon nefesh I love you barach. Why does it say alavavecha? Shanechem mitzavcha alavavecha. Could have just said I just commanded you today, because through mitzvahs you awaken the desire and the nefesh to God, the levavecha. She's teaching that through mitzvahs your heart gets fonder, in other words, connects. And this is the meaning kener mitzvah, that a mitzvah is like a flame, like a lamp. That mitzvah brings down the oir. Again, the keli brings the air, ner mitzvah. It says ner mitzvah v'teira air. Shai dezeh b'chinas ner v'ha'ora, b'nefesh ya ora sarotzim v'ava shebelev. Shai dezeh mimshach b'chinas ner v'nefesh. Okay, because this draws down the energy, the light of the desire and the ava and the love within the heart. Basically, he's defining what he said before in Aveda, that the more kelim bring down more air. So what is that? Naveh, that Torah mitzvahs draws down the air of Ava, both Ava Yena and Ava Apitam B'das. The higher love and the love that is rational. Okay, so the summary of this chapter, which we'll read now, is basically proving that the kelim are the key to drawing down the energy. And the more the containers, the more the energy is drawn down. And that's Kila Suni. Okay. The proof for this, which is that energy on its own, the light on its own would expire, and the kelim is what contains and grounds it. Miteo. Proof. Bring a proof from Teo. The containers were not conducive to ground, to settle the energy, integrate the energy, internalize it. And because of this also, the energies are not settled. In other words, it's not just because the energy is too intense. It's because the containers are the key. Because the container is the one that draws down the energy. And it draws it down according to its muhusa, according to its personality. And because the containers in Tayu were diminished, we're not worthy, we're not conducive, appropriate. That's why the energies in Tayu expired, elevated, ascended. Or betikun, by contrast, in the world of tikkun nasa kelim aruyim lekabel ha'er. The containers were created in a way that they're conducive to contain, receive the energy. V'hu inyan ribei kelim. And this is the abundance of containers in tikkun. Shezeh mitzad bitl. This comes from bitl. The parentheses here is outside the parentheses. Like we see the midas, the breakdown of chesed and gvur and the detailed midas in Atzilus show that's because the intellect causes bittul, affects bittul and subjugation and sublimation into the emotions. And the same meichin itself of a true comprehension it breaks down into many details specifically. And also in many different ways and contrasting and conflicting ideas. That's because Meichen, intelligence, being it's a comprehension of something that's above it, it's in a state of bittul. However, intellect from the other side, from the negative side, hein yesh. They're yesh. It's about self, ego. Because they don't feel the thing, the minyan, the concept. And holiness in sanctity, the primary thing is to feel the thing that you're studying, not just the theory and the comprehension of it. So from Moichin he goes now, same thing in Kelim, that their abundance, and through them it contains and nechaz, it holds on to the energy. And as the kelim grow and increase, the energy increases as a result. And that means kilo asuni, as if you made me, because we recreate the containers asuni, and you draw down through that the energy. And the same thing in Aveda, in our service of worship. Amoritz is not a chassid. Why? Because the Ava Yira shall be tam v'das. Yes, clearly shalamal metam v'das. Aval yem. Because Ava Yira, the love and awe, that's rational and super rational. Why they kelim the Torah mitzvahs is through the containers of Torah mitzvahs. So le'amoritz, you can't have chassid without Torah mitzvahs. If you want to have chassid, Ava, drawing down this energy, you have to have it through Torah mitzvahs. Wow. I say this still doesn't end. It still goes on. Next chapter is all about the Kelim and the Eris. He doesn't get back to this till chapter 95. So we're going to go another 2 chapters on how Kelim draw down the energy. I'm almost sure he's also finishing up some details in the whole idea of numbers, and and Keli work with each other. 100%. Yeah. It's very clear. Look, remember I gave the example the other day about Hametzi Eichel Pachas Mikashir. What does it mean? That if you take the Eichel out of the Keli, you'd be over an Avara, because you're carrying a container. As soon as the air goes into the container, same size. Nothing changed. So what do you see from that? It's I think a very fitting example here. You see from that the same quantity, the same volume, the same weight, whatever, can be sublimated to something that's air, and then it's elevated to that level, or it focuses on its own division. Then it's a different state. That's really, I think, where this whole idea. This explains the difference between ribui when the kelim are bottled to the eris, and when the ribui kelim are just kelim on their own. That's clearly what it's very clear, that distinction. It sounds like he's almost like answering that type of contradiction, but filling in that side of it to make sure that you get the picture. That's what it looks like to me, because
the distinction of the canon, then it's more of an hazard.
Yeah, exactly. To the point there could be a nikas achatzenim even. That's why there could be an ein hora. That's why counting is not appropriate. When Bnei Yisrael, the Eibush Zok will sail, and they count the way they should count.
Or when the containers that are drawing down there, it's
yeah, that's exactly it. It really ultimately comes down to transforming containers to be containers for the energy, to the point that the container, all it is an expression of Eir. The Mashal of Ametzi Eichel, by the way, is not as the Rebbe brings it, but also in Ayin Beis he brings it later. Okay, so we'll go a few more chapters. Listen, we swim along. But all this is leading to Sipur. Okay, we don't have to jump the gun here. I'm sure he's going to get back. I see in chapter 70-95.
It's interesting that somebody doesn't know Chassidus. How does he touch the Kila Sasuni? It's like
hundreds of Maimon Chazal you have a problem with. B'chlal, how do you create all those? Which said Abe says Kaloni Mereshi, when you're like, so nothing. So they either it's a mashal, but the problem is the whole shade. And how do you create Salam Alekim if you don't know Chassidus? What does Salam Alekim mean? It's meaningless. Okay, let's stop here. We did chapter 92, the bottom of page 176 through 178. Chapter